there are nights in Japan when the mist moves like memory soft, unhurried, and scented faintly of rain and distant cedar. On such nights, the mountains seem to lean closer to the valleys, and the world grows quieter, as though listening to something it has almost forgotten. Paths lose their sharpness. Rivers slow their voices. Even time itself appears to loosen its grip, drifting instead of flowing. On these nights, the old stories return. They do not arrive with fanfare or sound. They slip back into the world the way breath fogs the air in cold weather, briefly visible, then gone, yet unmistakably present. They move through the quiet hills and village edges, through abandoned torii gates and moss-covered stone steps, as if they had never truly left. The boundary between what is remembered and what is imagined thins, and the world becomes translucent, its edges softened by shadow and rain. Lanterns tremble most on such nights. A single flame, sheltered by paper and wood, sways gently in the damp air, its light stretching and shrinking with every passing breath of wind. Within that fragile glow, reflections gather faces that are not quite faces, movements that do not belong to anyone standing nearby. To human eyes, it is only the play of light and moisture. But the mountains know better. The forests know. And so do the spirits who have always walked between. It is said that foxes walk most freely when the rain is light and the world is unsure of itself. When human hearts grow still and the forest breathes without urgency, the veil between realms thins just enough for a fox's shadow to stretch across both worlds, the mortal and the unseen. On such nights, a footprint may appear where no one has passed, or a pair of eyes may glimmer briefly between the trees before vanishing into the dark. This is the story of one such fox. She was a spirit of the old mountains, born from smoke drifting upward at harvest's end and from autumn leaves pressed into damp earth. Her presence had no fixed shape, no single beginning. She learned the world slowly, through sound and scent, through the patience of stone and the long conversations of wind moving through cedar branches. She lived beneath the eaves of forgotten shrines and among the roots of ancient trees, listening. She listened to prayers murmur by farmers before dawn, hands pressed together in quiet hope. She listened to travelers resting beneath lantern light, whispering wishes they would never speak aloud in daylight. Coins rang softly as they fell into offering boxes, and incense smoke curled upward, carrying longing and gratitude in equal measure. To most, she was only another rumor of the countryside, a shimmer in the rice fields at dusk, a flicker of white passing between trunks, a presence felt more than seen. Children were warned not to follow such sights. Elders spoke of them with a mix of reverence and caution. And then life continued as it always does. But there was one human who saw her, truly saw her. Not with fear, not with hunger or desire, but with the stillness of someone who had learned how to look without reaching. In that gaze, something ancient stirred, as if two quiet currents had met beneath the surface of a deep lake. Their bond did not begin as love does in mortal tales. There were no promises spoken beneath the moon, no vows carried on trembling breath. There was no moment that could be pointed to or named as a beginning. Instead, there was recognition, a gentle pause in the world, like the instant when one season leans into the next. It was as if autumn had bowed to winter, or dusk had acknowledged the night. They shared no words, yet understanding passed between them, slow and unforced. In the space they held together, time loosened, and the world watched without interruption. What grew there was not possession, nor a longing for what could not last, but something quieter and more enduring. This tale is not one of tragedy carved sharply into memory, It is a story of remembrance of the tender ache that lingers when a dream fades without warning, of the way the scent of rain can awaken the feeling of a hand never held or a voice never heard aloud. It is about the weight of moments that do not demand to be kept, yet remain all the same. And so let us drift backward through time, past the world of men and their lantern-lit paths, past the whispering reeds along flooded fields, past the prayers folded carefully into silence. Let us return to a mountain where mist gathers before dawn, and where the moon never quite sleeps. The story begins where the first light touches the rain-soaked air, and a lone fox spirit awakens to the faint, steady sound of a human heart. At the edge of an old village stood a forest that seemed forever caught between seasons. Even in winter, when frost traced the roofs and breath rose pale into the air, its trees held a muted golden hue, as though autumn had refused to let go. Leaves clung softly to branches long after they should have fallen, their colors dulled but persistent, glowing faintly beneath moonlight and mist. The villagers called it Kogane Mori, the Golden Grove. Few dared enter after dusk. Children were warned away with gentle voices and firm hands. Travelers were advised to take the longer road rather than risk passing through at night. It was said that foxes lived there, and that their laughter could turn paths in on themselves, leading wanderers deeper until even the memory of direction dissolved. But beneath the weight of superstition, the forest was something else entirely. To those who could feel beyond fear, Kogane Mori was a living temple. Each branch bent with quiet intention. Each fallen leaf rested where it wished to be. The grove breathed slowly, patiently, as if listening to a rhythm older than footsteps or prayer. Light fell like silk through the canopy during the day, and at night the moon scattered itself across bark and moss, leaving pale reflections that shimmered and faded with the passing mist. The air carried the scent of pine resin and overripe persimmon, of damp earth and water moving over stone. Even in silence, the forest spoke, not in words, but in presence. It was here that the fox spirit dwelled. She did not walk as mortals do. She moved as warmth moves through cold air, drifting, unseen until suddenly felt. At times she was only a gleam of amber between roots, a brief flicker where no light should have been. At other moments she was a ripple in the mist, the sense that something had passed just behind one's shoulder. Her tales, 9 in number, though few eyes ever grasped more than once, swayed like pale smoke, trailing faint radiance that lingered long after she had gone. Where she passed, shadows softened. Where she lingered, the forest grew still. Even the wind learned to quiet itself around her. She had lived in Kogane Mori longer than memory could reach. She knew the grove in every season, every mood. She knew which stones warmed first beneath the sun, and which hollows gathered frost before dawn. She listened to the river that wound through the grove, its voice changing with the year, lively in spring, patient in winter, reflective beneath the moon. Sometimes she would rest by that river, dipping a paw lightly into the current to watch ripples fracture the moon's reflection. The broken light would dance across the water's surface, and she would observe it without longing, without thought, content to witness beauty without needing to claim it. Other nights she perched upon an old shrine stone, its surface worn smooth by centuries of offerings and weather. From there, she gazed down toward the village, watching lanterns awaken one by one as dusk deepened. Their glow was warm and fragile, trembling slightly in the damp air. She found them curious, these small lights born of human hands, brave enough to push back the dark yet never attempting to conquer it. She did not envy humans. She merely watched, curious, gentle, apart. Their lives burned briefly, but brightly. Their emotions rose and fell like sudden storms. To her, they were moments given shape, fleeting yet meaningful in their own way. She observed them as she observed falling leaves or melting snow, aware, attentive, but untouched. And yet, one evening, something shifted. The mist had gathered low that night, curling around tree trunks and river stones alike. The moon hung partially veiled, its light diffused into silver haze. From the forest's edge, a presence approached, hesitant, careful, marked by warmth. A figure entered the grove. He carried a lantern dimmed by damp air, its flame small but steady. Under one arm, he held a bundle of scrolls bound with simple cord. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, as though each footfall were placed with quiet respect. He did not push aside branches roughly, nor disturb fallen leaves more than necessary. He walked as one who believed the earth beneath him was sacred. His robes were plain, practical, touched with the scent of ink and old paper. His hands bore faint stains from long hours of writing, a scholar, perhaps, or a poet chasing something just beyond language. He paused often, not from fear, but from attention, as if the forest itself were worthy of being truly seen. The fox spirit watched from the shadows, unseen. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity stirring where habit once lay. Humans passed near the grove from time to time, but few entered with such quiet reverence. Fewer still carried no trace of demand, no wish spoken aloud, no prayer pushed into the night. The young man reached the river and knelt. He set his lantern carefully beside him and unfurled one of the scrolls. With practiced motions, he began to sketch, the curve of roots emerging from soil, the way moss softened stone, the moon's reflection trembling upon moving water. His lines were imperfect, sometimes faltering, but they were alive. Each mark carried intention rather than precision. The fox felt something ripple within her. It was not alarm, nor hunger, nor the sharp awareness of danger. It was a warmth unfamiliar in its origin, not drawn from the earth, nor gifted by moon or flame. It arose quietly from a place within her spirit that had long rested untouched. She watched as he worked, her presence still and open. He did not sense her, or perhaps he did, in a way that required no acknowledgement. His breathing slowed. His shoulders softened. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if curious about this small act of devotion. Time passed unnoticed. Eventually, the scholar rolled his scrolls once more and rose. He bowed slightly toward the trees, not to any shrine, not to any god, but to the forest itself. Then he took up his lantern and departed as quietly as he had come, his light fading between the trunks until only mist remained. The grove felt different in his absence. The fox remained where she was, listening to the echo of his footsteps long after they had vanished. The forest, which had always felt complete unto itself, now carried a subtle hollowness, as if a note had been struck and allowed to fade. That night, the wind carried the scent of rain and ink. She curled beneath the roots of the old shrine tree, her tails folding around her like drifting clouds. For the first time in centuries, her dreams did not return her to mountains or starlit skies or the slow dance of seasons. She dreamed instead of warmth that did not belong to the sun. And though she did not yet understand it, the first thread between their worlds had been woven, thin as mist, fragile as lantern light, yet strong enough to endure the quiet passage of time. The forest did not sleep that night. Mist drifted slowly between the trees, rising and settling as though guided by breath rather than wind. The moon shifted behind thin veils of cloud, and with each passing moment, the golden leaves of Kagin Mori seemed to dim and glow again, holding on to their color with quiet determination. The fox spirit stirred beneath the shrine's roots. She had rested in that place countless times before, curled within the shelter of ancient wood and stone, listening to the deep, steady pulse of the mountain. But tonight, rest would not come easily. Her awareness lingered on the path the scholar had taken, tracing his departure again and again through memory, as though the forest itself were replaying his steps. She rose silently. No snow was disturbed. No leaf shifted. Her form moved between moments rather than through space, gathering itself into presence as the grove seemed to lean inward, attentive. She walked toward the river once more, the faint glow of her spirit brushing moss and bark without leaving mark or warmth. At the water's edge, the moon's reflection lay fractured by gentle current. She watched it for a long while, the broken light trembling, reforming, dissolving again. It reminded her of something she could not name, a feeling that resisted stillness, that changed shape when examined too closely. She lowered her paw into the stream. The water was cold, yet it did not bite. It accepted her touch without question, flowing around her as it always had. But tonight, even the river felt subtly altered, as though it carried more than melted snow and mountain runoff. It carried memory. Across the grove, the lantern glow from the village had begun to fade. One by one, the lights were extinguished, returning the mountainside to darkness. Only the forest remained awake, holding its quiet vigil. The fox turned her gaze toward the path again. She wondered, not in words, but in sensation, whether the human would return. Such thoughts were unusual for her. Humans passed like seasons. Some lingered, some vanished, all faded eventually. She had watched generations come and go, their footprints swallowed by moss, their stories reduced to whispers. She had never followed one with her attention once they left her sight. Yet now something within her had shifted. She sensed it in the way the forest responded to her presence, how the leaves trembled faintly, how the air seemed to gather around her, expectant. Kagin Mori had always mirrored her spirit, and tonight it reflected a quiet unease, a subtle anticipation. As dawn approached, frost crept across stones and branches alike. The fox remained awake, moving through the grove as the first pale light filtered through mist. She passed places she knew well, the hollow where deer once slept, the slope where snow lingered longest, the shrine stone smoothed by centuries of offerings. She paused where the scholar had knelt. The ground still held the impression of his presence. A faint warmth lingered, already fading, but not yet gone. She lowered herself there, resting where he had rested, and for a moment the forest felt strangely complete again. In that stillness, something else became clear. She could feel the boundary between worlds more distinctly than ever before. It shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone, thin and permeable. The human had crossed it without knowing, not by magic or ritual, but by attention, by reverence. The fox spirit understood then that this was not chance. Kagin Mori had allowed him entry. The grove did not welcome many, and it welcomed none without reason. The forest remembered kindness. It recognized stillness. And when it found a heart quiet enough to listen, it responded. As morning light grew stronger, the fox retreated deeper into the trees, her form softening, thinning, returning to the unseen. But something had been set in motion. Her rhythm had changed, subtle but undeniable. The forest that dreamed in gold now dreamed of something more. And somewhere beyond its edge, a young scholar carried with him the faintest sense of having been observed, not with fear, but with gentleness, though he could not yet name why his thoughts returned, again and again, to the silent grove where autumn refused to end. The moon that followed that night rose full and pale, a quiet disk suspended above the mountains, so luminous that it softened the edges of the world. Its light spilled gently into the golden grove, washing over trunks and stones, turning the winding river into something that looked less like water and more like glass shaped by breath. Nothing glittered. Nothing shone sharply. Everything seemed muted, as though the moon itself wished not to disturb what slept below it. Yet the grove was not asleep. Beneath the canopy, silence stirred. Fireflies drifted between the trees, their faint lights appearing and vanishing like half-remembered prayers. Mist rose slowly from the earth, curling around roots and fallen leaves, climbing the trunks as if the forest were exhaling a long-held breath. Even the wind moved carefully, passing through branches without urgency, as though aware that something fragile lingered in the air. Before dawn, the fox spirit awakened. She emerged from the quiet beneath the shrine roots where she had rested, her fur cool with dew, moonlight clinging to her like frost that did not melt. The night felt different. Not louder, not brighter, only altered in a way that resisted naming. There was a tension in the air, subtle yet persistent, like a note held too long. She stood still, listening. It was then she felt it, a pulse that did not belong to the forest, yet had become entangled with it. A trace of presence, faint but unmistakable. A memory that was not her own. She followed it without sound. Her paws touched the ground lightly, stirring neither leaf nor snow. She moved through the grove as mist does, guided not by sight but by the residue of intention. The place revealed itself to her before she reached the riverbank where the human had knelt, the moss still pressed where his weight had rested, the earth carrying the quiet echo of his breath. The fox lowered her head. There, nestled among damp moss and fallen needles, lay a sheet of parchment. Its edges had curled slightly in the night's moisture. Ink had softened and spread, its once firm lines blurred into gentle shadows. The drawing was unfinished, fragmentary, not an image meant to be seen clearly. There was no attempt at precision, no effort to define, only suggestion. The curve of an old root reaching toward water, the shimmer of moonlight trembling on the river's surface, and faintly, so faintly she might have imagined it, a pale echo of her own form, caught not directly, but in reflection, a suggestion of movement, a presence without shape. The fox did not move. Understanding settled over her slowly, like falling snow. He had seen her. Not as humans see one another beneath daylight. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. Enough for her to cross the invisible threshold between worlds. Enough for her existence to leave an imprint in his memory. For a spirit, to be seen was rare. Most humans passed through the grove without sensing its breath. They offered prayers to wood and stone without realizing they were heard. Their eyes slid over the world, seeking meaning only in what could be named. But this human had paused. His gaze had lingered not on form, but on feeling. He had not tried to capture her shape. He had captured her stillness. She gathered the parchment carefully, folding it as one might fold a fallen petal, mindful not to tear what was already fragile. The memory of it pressed softly against her spirit, warm in a way that unsettled her. She carried it with her as the night thinned and the moon began its slow descent. Time loosened its grip. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. In a realm of spirits, time did not advance in measured steps. It drifted, circling itself, expanding and contracting like breath. The human returned to the grove again and again and again. Sometimes he brought charcoal and parchment. Sometimes he came empty-handed, content to sit beside the river and listen. He never spoke aloud, yet his silence was not empty. It was shaped, intentional, filled with attention. His breathing aligned with the slow movement of water. His stillness settled into the forest as naturally as moss upon stone. When the wind moved through the canopy, it brushed against both of them, and the fox felt, inexplicably, that they shared the same air. She began to linger closer, always unseen, always just beyond the edge of perception. From the shelter of ferns and shadow, she watched him draw. She noticed the way his fingers trembled when he paused, how his hand hovered as though waiting for permission from the night itself. She saw how his gaze softened when a leaf drifted past, how his shoulders eased when the river caught the moon just right. She learned his rhythm, the tilt of his head, the cadence of his steps, the way his lips curved into a faint smile for reasons even he seemed not to understand. And within her something unfamiliar took shape. It began as a quiet question, fragile and unformed, like mist at dawn. Was it possible for a spirit to love what would fade? The mountains had taught her many things. They had taught her that nothing remains as it is. Snow becomes water. Water becomes cloud. Stone crumbles into soil, and soil feeds roots that will one day return to dust. Even spirits, born of wind and shadow, are not untouched by change. They drift, they thin, they forget themselves over centuries. She had accepted this long before she learned the shape of longing. Yet the human unsettled that understanding. He returned night after night, not chasing revelation, not demanding meaning, but offering himself to the quiet as one offers a bold terrain. His presence did not disturb the grove, it seemed to complete it. Where he sat, the forest felt more aware of itself, as though being observed by someone who loved it without needing to name it. The fox watched from her hidden places, her 9 tails curled close, light dimmed to little more than warmth. She could feel the pull between them grow, thread by invisible thread. It was not desire as humans know it, sharp and burning. It was slower, deeper, a recognition that spread outward, softening the boundaries she had kept intact for centuries. He painted the moon differently each night. Sometimes it hovered high and distant, an unreachable witness. Other times it rested low in the river, trembling with each ripple. He painted moonlight caught in frost, moonlight scattered by rain, moonlight broken by leaves. And though he never painted her directly, she felt herself present in every stroke, not as a subject, but as a silence around which the image turned. She wondered what he felt when he painted. Did his chest ache the way hers did now, with the fullness that had nowhere to go? Did he sense the gaze that rested upon him, ancient and patient, watching without demand? Or did he simply follow a feeling he could not explain, trusting it to lead him back to the grove again and again? One evening, rain fell. It was not a storm that announced itself with thunder or wind, but a quiet veil descending upon the forest, softening every sound. Leaves darkened. The river thickened with silver ripples. Lantern light diffused into halos, trembling gently as though uncertain of its own existence. The scholar came anyway. His lantern flickered as he crossed the threshold of the grove, its flame bowing to the rain. He moved carefully, robes damp at the hem, breath visible in the cool air. When he reached the river bank, he did not draw. Instead, he wrote. The brush whispered against paper, its sound barely louder than falling petals. Ink spread slowly, guided by patience rather than intent. Words formed not as declarations, but as offerings. He paused often, listening between lines, as though waiting for something beyond himself to speak. Hidden among the ferns, the fox listened too. The rhythm of his writing became a song without melody, and the forest seemed to hum along, cedar and water and mist sharing a single, quiet breath. Rain slid down her fur in silver threads, gathering at her pores before dissolving into earth. For a moment, the boundary between them felt impossibly thin. She imagined stepping forward. Imagined the scholar lifting his gaze, rain clinging to his lashes, lantern light reflecting in his eyes. Imagined their gazes meeting beneath a hush of falling rain, not as spirit and human, but as two beings recognizing something fragile and true. Her pore shifted, then stilled. She knew the cost. To cross that boundary was not merely to reveal herself. It was to unravel the veil that protected both worlds. Spirits who lingered too long among humans lost their shape. Humans who glimpsed too deeply into the unseen carried the weight of it for the rest of their brief lives. Love, when it ignored the laws of its realm, did not burn brightly. It eroded. And yet, the heart does not always obey the laws that govern the mountains. When the scholar finally rose to leave, rain still clinging to his sleeves, the parchment he carried bore no forest, no river, no moon. Instead, it held something quieter and more unsettling, the suggestion of eyes watching through rain. Ancient, kind, filled with a sorrow he could not explain. He did not know why he had drawn them. He only knew that when he looked upon them later by candlelight, warmth and ache tangled in his chest, a feeling rose that refused to be named. A sense of having been accompanied, of having been seen in return. Far away, in the golden grove, the fox spirit felt that same ache echo through her immortal heart. And though neither spoke, neither touched, nor across the space between them, something irrevocable had already occurred. They had begun to remember one another. There came a time when the grove itself began to change. Not in the way forests usually change, not through the slow surrender of leaves or the quiet advance of frost, but in something subtler, harder to name. The golden hues of Kagemori lingered longer than they should have. Leaves clung to branches well past their season, glowing softly even as winter crept closer from the mountains. The villagers noticed, whispering that the forest had grown stubborn, that autumn had refused to depart. The fox spirit knew better. The grove was remembering. Each night the scholar returned, and each night the forest seemed to lean closer toward him. Roots shifted almost imperceptibly beneath the soil. Moss thickened where he sat. Fireflies appeared later into the year, their lights flickering like thoughts unwilling to fade. The air grew heavy with the scent of ripened fruit and damp earth, even as cold sharpened the wind beyond the trees. The fox watched all of this from within the silence. She felt the forest respond to her unrest, mirroring the tension coiled gently within her chest. Spirits and places are bound together more deeply than humans know. When one changes, the other listens. And she was changing now, slowly, irrevocably. She found herself waiting. Not merely watching for the scholar's arrival, but anticipating it, sensing the approach of his footsteps before they touched the ground, feeling the lanterns glow before it breached the trees. When he did not come, unease rippled through her like a misplaced season. She had not known longing could sharpen the senses so. On one such evening, he arrived later than usual. The moon had already climbed high, and frost traced delicate veins across fallen leaves. He moved more slowly, shoulders heavy, as though carrying a weight beyond parchment and ink. He sat by the river and did nothing. No drawing, no writing, only listening. The fox drifted closer than she ever had before, her presence thinning to little more than warmth and breath. She hovered near the riverbank, just beyond the reach of lantern light. She could hear the scholar's breathing, uneven, thoughtful, and the quiet sound of his sleeve brushing against stone. Something troubled him. She sensed it not as a thought, but as a dissonance, a ripple where harmony once lay. Humans carried such ripples often, yet this one seemed deeper, threaded with a sadness that felt oddly familiar. She wondered briefly whether he too felt the strain of standing between worlds, one of flesh and time, the other of vacant memory. As the night deepened, he finally reached for his brush. This time, his hand did not move with certainty. The lines wavered, then paused altogether. He stared at the page as though waiting for it to speak first. When he began again, the shapes that emerged were not of the forest, nor of the moon. They were of a path, a narrow trail winding through trees that glowed faintly, neither fully autumn nor fully winter. A path that seemed to invite passage, yet warned of cost. He shaded it carefully, lingering over its curves, darkening the edges as though unsure where it led. The fox felt her breath catch. She recognized that path. It was not a place of earth, but of choice, the invisible crossing where spirit sometimes faltered, where curiosity tugged against duty. Few ever noticed it, fewer still dared to follow it. Yet here it was, taking shape beneath human hands, born of intuition rather than sight. Had he sensed it too? A soft wind passed through the grove, stirring leaves and fur alike. The fox felt an ache settled deeper within her, no longer distant, no longer abstract. It pressed against her ribs like something that wished to be acknowledged. For the first time since she had awakened to the world, she wondered not just whether she could love a human, but what it would cost her if she did not. She withdrew before dawn, retreating beneath the shrine roots where spirits sleep lightly. Yet rest did not come easily. Her dreams were filled not with mountains or moonlight, but with footsteps upon a glowing path, moving steadily forward, never looking back. The forest held its breath. Something was nearing its turning point. The nights that followed grew quieter, as though the forest itself had learned restraint. No owls called from the upper branches. No deer passed through the undergrowth. Even the river softened its voice, smoothing its surface into something almost reflective, as if it too were watching. The golden leaves still clung to the trees, but they no longer glowed with the same warmth. Their light had turned inward, subdued, like embers hidden beneath ash. The fox spirit moved through this silence with measured care. She found herself returning again and again to the place where the scholar had drawn the path. The parchment was gone, of course, carried back into the human world, but its impression remained. The ground felt thinner there, the air more responsive. When she stood upon that spot, she sensed the faintest pull, like a tide that did not yet know its own strength. It frightened her, not because it threatened her existence, but because it tempted her will. Spirits endure by remaining aligned with their nature. They flow as the mountain flows, fade as the mist fades, and never cling. To linger too long in desire was to risk becoming something else, something neither spirit nor memory, but stranded between. And yet, when the scholar returned the following night, all such caution dissolved. He arrived without lantern this time. The moon was enough. Silver light spilled through the canopy, tracing the contours of his face as he stepped into the grove. Without the lantern's warmth, he seemed more fragile somehow, less anchored. His shadow stretched long and thin across the forest floor, wavering as though uncertain where to rest. He sat, as he always did, near the river, but instead of facing the water, he turned toward the deeper forest. Toward her. The fox felt it immediately, that subtle shift, the unmistakable sensation of being perceived not by sight, but by presence. His gaze did not pierce the veil, yet it hovered near its surface, brushing against it like a question left unspoken. For a long time, neither moved. Mist curled between them, slow and deliberate. A leaf detached itself from a branch and drifted down, landing soundlessly between root and stone. The forest seemed to fold inward, creating a space that felt both intimate and suspended. Then the skull bowed. Not to a shrine, not to a spirit he could name, but to the silence itself. The gesture was simple, unadorned, yet it struck her more deeply than any prayer she had heard in centuries. It carried no expectation, no demand, only acknowledgement. Something within her shifted. She allowed herself to draw closer. Not enough to be seen. Not yet. But close enough that the air between them warmed, just slightly, just perceptibly. The scholar inhaled, startled, and his fingers tightened briefly around the edge of his sleeve. He felt it. The fox felt the realization ripple through him, not as fear, but as wonder. His breath slowed. His shoulders relaxed. He did not turn, did not search the darkness for explanation. Instead, he closed his eyes, as though trusting whatever stood unseen before him. In that moment, the boundary between their worlds thinned to little more than breath. The fox had crossed no visible line, yet she knew with sudden clarity that something irreversible had occurred. She had allowed herself to be known, if only as warmth and stillness, as the quiet certainty that one is not alone. When dawn came, it came gently. The scholar rose, bowed once more toward the forest, and departed without looking back. His steps faded down the mountain path, carrying with them the soft imprint of understanding. The fox remained. She stood beneath the trees as sunlight filtered through golden frost alike, illuminating the leaves that refused to fall. She understood now why the season lingered. The forest, like her, had sensed the weight of what was forming, a moment too fragile to release. But seasons, even stubborn ones, cannot be held forever. Far beyond the grove, winter gathered its breath. And soon, she knew, a choice would be required, one that no spirit could avoid, no matter how gently the forest dreamed. Winter did not arrive all at once. It crept. First in the way the morning sharpened, frost forming delicate veins across stone and bark before the sun could reach them. Then in the way the river stiffened at its edges, whispering less freely as though holding its breath. Even the golden leaves of Coggain Mori began to pale, their warmth thinning into something quieter, more resigned. The fox's spirit felt the change before she saw it. Winter spoke to spirits not with cold, but with memory. It reminded them of their origin, of stillness, of endurance, of the long silence beneath snow where nothing decays, only waits. Each passing night pressed gently against her awareness, urging her back toward the higher slopes, toward the places where foxfire burned brightest and human footsteps never lingered. She resisted. Not with defiance, but with delay. She lingered longer by the river. She rested beneath the shrine stone even when frost rimmed its base. She listened for the scholar's steps before she listened to the mountain wind. He returned less often now. When he did, his movements carried a new weight. His robes were thicker, his breath visible in pale clouds that dissolved as soon as they formed. He spent less time drawing, more time simply sitting, hands folded in his sleeves, gaze unfocused yet attentive, as if he too sensed that something unseen was tightening its hold. The fox watched from the shadows, her presence restrained but unwavering. She noticed the small changes first. The way his fingers sometimes paused mid-motion, hovering as though reaching for warmth that was no longer there. The way his eyes traced the forest's edges rather than its heart. The way he lingered before leaving, standing at the boundary between trees and path as if unsure which world demanded him more. Once, as dusk settled and snow threatened in the air, he spoke. Not to her, not aloud, but to the space itself. His breath shaped a single sound, soft, uncertain, before he swallowed it back into silence. The fox felt the echo of that unspoken word settle inside her, heavy and unresolved. That night snow fell for the first time. It did not storm. It drifted. Each flake descended alone, unhurried, dissolving sound as it touched earth. The grove transformed quietly, gold yielding to white, warmth folding inward like a memory pressed between pages. The fox moved through it with reverence. Snow did not cling to her fur. It parted around her, recognizing its own. Her steps left no trace, yet the forest felt her passage as a subtle shift, a hush within the hush. She stopped at the river's edge. Ice had begun to lace its surface, thin and tentative, mirroring the pale sky above. She gazed into it and saw not her reflection, but possibility, the stillness she was meant to return to, the solitude that had shaped her long before the scholar's arrival. This was the promise of winter. Not cruelty, not separation, but preservation. To remain was to risk change. To stay too close to warmth was to soften beyond repair. Spirits who lingered too long among humans did not fade. They fractured, their essence stretched thin until they became echoes without form. She knew this. And yet, as she turned back toward the grove, she felt the pull again, stronger now, insistent. The scholar was there. He stood beneath a cedar heavy with snow, his lantern casting a muted glow that barely pierced the falling white. When he saw the river icing over, his expression shifted, not with fear, but with quiet understanding. He was watching the season close. The fox remained unseen, but closer than she had ever allowed herself to be. The air between them warmed slightly, just enough to slow the snow's descent, just enough for him to pause and inhale. For a moment, a fragile, dangerous moment, Winter hesitated. The fox understood then that the choice would not be made by distance alone. Avoidance would no longer suffice. The mountain would demand clarity, and so would the human heart she had come to mirror. Above them, clouds gathered heavy with snow yet to fall. And somewhere deep within the forest, the last golden leaf finally loosened its hold. Snow changed the forest's voice. Where once Kogin-mori breathed in layered murmurs, the leaves, water, insects, distant wind, now it spoke in intervals of silence. Sound arrived softened, muted before it could fully form, as if the world itself were listening inward. The fox spirit moved through this quiet with growing unease. Winter had always been her season. Snow had once felt like home, a veil that simplified the world, reducing it to essence. But now, each falling flake carried weight. Each unbroken white surface reminded her that time was closing in, not stretching outward. She sensed the mountain's attention turn toward her. Spirits do not receive summons the way humans do. There are no words, no voices calling through the air. Instead, the land tightens. Paths narrow. Possibilities grow fewer until only one direction remains. She felt it in the way the higher winds pressed downward, urging her upslope. She felt it in the foxfires flickering faintly along distant ridges, signals meant for her kind alone. The mountain was preparing to seal itself fully into winter, and she was expected to return to her place among the unseen. Yet each night, the scholar still came. Less often, yes, but with greater intention. One evening, snow falling thick enough to blur the edges of trees, he arrived carrying no lantern. He walked by memory alone, trusting the forest to guide him. When he reached the river, now mostly frozen, he stopped and stood very still, as though afraid that movement might break something delicate. The fox watched from close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. He knelt and placed a small bundle upon the snow. Carefully, reverently, from it, he withdrew several folded sheets of parchment, weighted at the corners with smooth stones. They were drawings, not studies, not sketches, but something nearer to confession. The forest, the river, the shrines stone beneath roots, and always, threaded between them, the suggestion of a presence, never fully drawn, never named. Just light where light should not be, warmth where snow should dominate. A curve in the air. A gaze implied rather than shown. The fox felt something tighten in her chest. These were not attempts to capture her. They were offerings, acknowledgments of something shared, even if only in silence. The scholar lingered, then pressed his forehead briefly to the frozen earth. The gesture was small, almost nothing. But it was old. Older than language. A bow not meant for gods, but for the truth of a place. When he rose, his breath caught. For the first time, the fox stepped forward. Not fully. She allowed her presence to condense, to brush against the edge of perception. The air warmed slightly. Snow slowed, hovering a heartbeat longer before falling. The scholar froze, sensing the shift with the same instinct that had drawn him here night after night. He did not turn. He did not speak. He simply waited. The fox stood behind him, close enough now that the boundary between worlds thinned to translucence. She could see the fine frost along his collar, the tension in his shoulders, the fragile determination holding him upright. This was the moment the mountain had warned her against. To be seen again, not as reflection, not as suggestion, but as presence, would anchor something irrevocable. Even a single step closer would change the shape of her existence. Snow thickened around them. The fox lifted one paw, then lowered it without sound. Instead of revealing herself, she let her essence drift, a breath of warmth against his back, a hush that carried intention without form. It was enough. The scholar exhaled slowly, eyes closing. Tears did not fall. He did not reach out. But his expression softened into something like acceptance, not of loss, but of truth. Whatever he had sensed, whatever he had known without knowing, had been confirmed. When he gathered his parchments and left, his steps were steady. The fox watched him disappear into the white. She did not follow. That night, the mountain spoke clearly at last. Not in command, but in certainty. Winter would deepen. The grove would sleep. Humans would retreat to hearth and memory. And she would ascend, carrying with her the imprint of a warmth that could not survive the season, but would not be erased by it either. As dawn approached, snow began to fall harder, sealing paths, erasing traces.
The fox climbed toward the higher slopes without looking back.
Behind her, Kagin Mori vanished beneath white silence. Ahead, the mountain waited, and within her something fragile and human remained, preserved, not destroyed, like a pressed leaf held safely between pages, never to bloom again, yet never to be forgotten. High above the grove, winter gathered itself. The mountain was not cruel, it was ancient. It did not judge, nor did it punish. It simply remembered its own laws, older than foxfire and older than prayer. Snow fell there in layers thick enough to muffle even thought, and the wind carried voices that were not meant for human ears. Here was where spirits returned when the world below grew too heavy with meaning.
The fox reached the upper slopes as dusk faded into a colorless night.
Around her, the land stretched wide and bare, ridges sculpted by centuries of wind, stone softened only by time. No lanterns glimmered here. No footsteps echoed. The air itself felt thinner, quieter, as though sound had learned to restrain itself. She paused beside a twisted pine, its branches bowed under snow. Below, far beyond sight, the golden grove slept. She could still feel it, the place where autumn lingered too long, where human breath had once warmed the night air. The memory pulsed faintly within her, like embers buried beneath ash.
The mountain had not taken that from her. It could not. What had been carried willingly could not be erased. But it could be named.
Names are power among spirits. To name a thing is to accept its weight. To refuse a name is to let it remain missed, felt, but never held. The fox had lived centuries without names, moving through the world as presence alone. She was wind between trees, light upon snow, a whisper that never stayed long enough to ache.
Yet now, a single name hovered unspoken within her.
She did not know the human's name.
She had never heard it spoken, never seen it written clearly.
And yet, in the rhythm of his steps, the cadence of his breath, the way his silence curved inward, something distinct had formed. Something singular. The mountain sensed her hesitation.
Snow swirled tighter, the wind rising just enough to draw her attention inward.
Foxfires flickered faintly along the ridge, pale and distant, other spirits watching, not intruding, but aware.
They knew this moment.
Every fox who walks between worlds eventually reaches it. Below, the human would return to his village. He would hang his damp robes to dry, warm his hands over fire, and unwrap the parchments he carried so carefully. He would look upon the shapes he had drawn and feel a longing without direction, a tenderness with no place to rest.
He would wonder why winter felt different now.
The fox closed her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine speaking a name aloud, not as sound, but as intention. To acknowledge him not as human, not as mortal, but as this one, distinct among all others. The weight of it pressed against her chest. To name him would bind memory to form. It would make forgetting impossible. Snow brushed her fur, melting briefly before freezing again. The mountain waited, patient as always.
At last the fox exhaled.
She did not speak his name. Instead, she shaped it inward, folding it carefully into herself, not releasing it into the world, but keeping it safe from it. A name carried silently, like a talisman hidden beneath robes. This was her compromise. She would not cross the boundary again. She would not reveal herself fully, nor allow longing to draw her downward.
But neither would she deny what had been shared.
Some truths are not meant to be lived, only held.
As the night deepened, the fox lay upon the snow and let winter settle around her.
The wind softened. The foxfires dimmed. Above, stars flickered through thin cloud, distant and indifferent. Yet within her, something warm remained, a memory shaped like moonlight on water, a presence that did not ask to endure, only to have existed. By morning, the mountain would seal itself completely, and far below, a human would wake with the faintest sense that something precious had moved just beyond reach, not lost, but preserved somewhere beyond knowing.
Dawn arrived without color.
On the mountain, morning did not bloom, it revealed. Snowlight crept across stone and pine, dissolving shadow without warmth, exposing the land exactly as it was.
The fox rose as the horizon paled, her breath forming a slow white plume that vanished almost as soon as it appeared.
Below the peaks, the world of humans was waking. She could feel it distantly, the subtle shift in air as hearth fires were stirred, the faint rhythm of footsteps beginning again on frozen paths. These sensations reached her not as sound, but as pressure, like ripples touching the edges of still water. She turned her gaze downward. The golden grove lay far beyond sight, hidden by ridges and drifting cloud, yet she knew it as one knows a scar beneath fur, unseen, but ever present. Even from here, she felt the place where autumn lingered unnaturally, where moonlight fell softer than elsewhere, where memory refused to fade on schedule. That forest had changed her.
The mountain did not reproach her for this. It did not whisper warnings or call her back with force.
Instead, it did what it had always done. It reminded. Snow cracked faintly beneath her paws as she moved along the ridge. Each step echoed inward, measured and deliberate. She was not fleeing, nor was she lingering. She was simply moving, as spirits do when thought grows too heavy to hold still. Along the slope, ice-laden branches trembled in the breeze. From time to time, loose snow slid free and vanished soundlessly into the ravines below.
The fox watched these small collapses with quiet attention.
So much falls without being noticed, she thought. In centuries past, she had watched villages rise and empty again, paths appear and vanish beneath grass, names spoken once and never again. She had never mourned these losses. They were natural, expected.
Humans passed through the world like brief weather, leaving impressions that softened quickly. But this human had not passed through her.
He had stayed, not in body, but in resonance.
She remembered the way he had paused before entering the grove, as though asking permission without words.
The way his lantern light never felt intrusive, but reverent. The way he had bowed slightly to the trees before leaving, not knowing why.
These were not habits learned. They were instincts.
The fox stopped near a sheer drop where the land fell away into cloud. Below, the wind moved slowly, carrying fragments of snow that spun lazily before dissolving. She imagined releasing her memory into that vastness, letting it scatter, letting it thin until it could no longer ache.
But she did not. Some memories are not burdens. Some are anchors.
She lay down again, curling her tails close, and allowed herself to rest, truly rest, for the first time since the moonlit night by the river.
Sleep took her not as darkness, but as gentle suspension. She dreamed.
In her dream, the forest breathed more deeply than usual. Leaves glowed faintly gold, and the river reflected not the moon, but a face she could not quite see. The human stood there, older and younger at once, his features blurred as though seen through water.
He did not speak.
he never needed to. She felt his presence not as longing, but as recognition, the same quiet acknowledgement that had passed between them from the beginning. In the dream, there was no boundary to cross, no law to break. They existed side by side, separate yet aligned, like parallel paths briefly visible under snow. When she woke, the dream lingered like warmth trapped beneath fur. The sun never reached the mountain fully that day. Clouds thickened, sealing the peaks in pale silence. The fox rose and turned away from the heights, beginning her descent, not back to the grove, but toward the deeper wilds where few humans ever wandered.
This was not exile. It was balance.
She would remain within the world, but at a distance that preserved what had been shared. She would watch from farther away, listen without being heard, remember without being seen. And somewhere below, the human would continue to walk the forest paths. He would draw less often now, not because the inspiration had left him, but because some things resisted capture.
He would carry the ache quietly, never naming it, never demanding answers from it.
In time, he might love another, build a life shaped by seasons and years. Yet on certain nights, when mist moved like memory and lanterns trembled in rain, he would pause without knowing why.
He would look toward the trees
and feel, faintly, that he had once been known by something older than time. The fox did not need more than this. As evening returned and snow began again, she slipped into the forest's deeper shadow, her form dissolving into movement, into hush, into story. The mountain accepted her passage without comment. The wind smoothed her trail closed.
What remained was not absence. It was continuity.
A thread stretched gently across worlds, not pulling, not binding, but quietly enduring.
Dawn arrived without color.
On the mountain, morning did not bloom, it revealed. Snowlight crept across stone and pine, dissolving shadow without warmth, exposing the land exactly as it was.
The fox rose as the horizon paled, her breath forming a slow white plume that vanished almost as soon as it appeared.
Below the peaks, the world of humans was waking. She could feel it distantly, the subtle shift in air as hearth fires were stirred, the faint rhythm of footsteps beginning again on frozen paths. These sensations reached her not as sound, but as pressure, like ripples touching the edges of still water. She turned her gaze downward. The golden grove lay far beyond sight, hidden by ridges and drifting cloud, yet she knew it as one knows a scar beneath fur, unseen, but ever present. Even from here, she felt the place where autumn lingered unnaturally, where moonlight fell softer than elsewhere, where memory refused to fade on schedule. That forest had changed her.
The mountain did not reproach her for this. It did not whisper warnings or call her back with force.
Instead, it did what it had always done. It reminded. Snow cracked faintly beneath her paws as she moved along the ridge. Each step echoed inward, measured and deliberate. She was not fleeing, nor was she lingering. She was simply moving, as spirits do when thought grows too heavy to hold still. Along the slope, ice-laden branches trembled in the breeze. From time to time, loose snow slid free and vanished soundlessly into the ravines below. The fox watched these small collapses with quiet attention. So much falls without being noticed, she thought. In centuries past, she had watched villages rise and empty again, paths appear and vanish beneath grass, names spoken once and never again. She had never mourned these losses. They were natural, expected.
Humans pass through the world like brief weather, leaving impressions that softened quickly. But this human had not passed through her.
He had stayed, not in body, but in resonance.
She remembered the way he had paused before entering the grove, as though asking permission without words.
The way his lantern light never felt intrusive, but reverent. The way he had bowed slightly to the trees before leaving, not knowing why.
These were not habits learned. They were instincts.
The fox stopped near a sheer drop where the land fell away into cloud. Below, the wind moved slowly, carrying fragments of snow that spun lazily before dissolving. She imagined releasing her memory into that vastness, letting it scatter, letting it thin until it could no longer ache.
But she did not. Some memories are not burdens. Some are anchors.
She lay down again, curling her tails close, and allowed herself to rest, truly rest, for the first time since the moonlit night by the river.
Sleep took her not as darkness, but as gentle suspension. She dreamed.
In her dream, the forest breathed more deeply than usual. Leaves glowed faintly gold, and the river reflected not the moon, but a face she could not quite see. The human stood there, older and younger at once, his features blurred as though seen through water.
He did not speak.
He never needed to. She felt his presence not as longing, but as recognition, the same quiet acknowledgement that had passed between them from the beginning. In the dream, there was no boundary to cross, no law to break. They existed side by side, separate yet aligned, like parallel paths briefly visible under snow. When she woke, the dream lingered like warmth trapped beneath fur. The sun never reached the mountain fully that day. Clouds thickened, sealing the peaks in pale silence. The fox rose and turned away from the heights, beginning her descent, not back to the grove, but toward the deeper wilds where few humans ever wandered.
This was not exile. It was balance.
She would remain within the world, but at a distance that preserved what had been shared. She would watch from farther away, listen without being heard, remember without being seen. And somewhere below, the human would continue to walk the forest paths. He would draw less often now, not because the inspiration had left him, but because some things resisted capture.
He would carry the ache quietly, never naming it, never demanding answers from it.
In time, he might love another, build a life shaped by seasons and years. Yet on certain nights, when mist moved like memory and lanterns trembled in rain, he would pause without knowing why.
He would look toward the trees
and feel, faintly, that he had once been known by something older than time. The fox did not need more than this. As evening returned and snow began again, she slipped into the forest's deeper shadow, her form dissolving into movement, into hush, into story. The mountain accepted her passage without comment. The winds smoothed her trail closed.
What remained was not absence. It was continuity.
A thread stretched gently across worlds, not pulling, not binding, but quietly enduring. Beyond the shrine, the forest opened into a narrow valley where snow gathered more softly, settling as though reluctant to disturb the earth beneath. Here the fox slowed. The air felt different, not heavier, but layered, as if time itself had folded and left its edges exposed. This was a place where moments overlapped. The fox had passed through this valley countless times across centuries, yet tonight it felt unfamiliar. Memory does that. It rearranges the landscape without changing a single stone. What once felt endless now carried a quiet finality, not of ending, but of completion.
She sensed the human again.
Not as presence, not as spirit, but as echo.
It was subtle the way the snow reflected moonlight in uneven patches, the faint curve of footprints that never fully formed, the hush that settled whenever her thoughts drifted toward him.
Humans leave traces even when they do not intend to.
Some linger longer than they should.
She remembered the first night she had followed him beyond the grove. He had walked slowly, lantern low, snow collecting in the folds of his cloak.
The fox had remained hidden then, her steps matching his without sound. She had watched the way he paused to observe frost gathering on branches, the way his breath clouded and vanished, as though he were already practicing how to disappear.
That memory returned now with softened edges. The fox realized she no longer recalled his face with clarity. Instead, she remembered gestures, the angle of his shoulders, the patience in his movements, the stillness that followed him like a second shadow. Humans blur quickly in the mind of a spirit, but feeling remains. Feeling lingers.
She reached the center of the valley, where a single stone marker stood half buried in snow.
It bore no inscription. No offering rested beside it.
Yet the ground around it was smooth, undisturbed, as if the land itself kept vigil. The fox stopped. This was where she had once chosen not to appear.
On a night much like this one, long ago, the scholar had come here alone.
He had carried no parchment, no brush.
Only a lantern and a folded scrap of paper tucked into his sleeve.
He had stood before the stone for a long time, snow collecting in his hair until the flame wavered dangerously low.
He had spoken then, not to the fox, but to the silence. His voice had been quiet, steady, shaped by resignation rather than sorrow. He spoke of dreams that refused to fade, of eyes he could not forget, of a presence that made the world feel deeper but no less distant.
He did not ask for answers. He asked for peace. The fox had listened from the trees, her heart pulled taut between instinct and restraint. She had wanted to step forward, to let him see her not as reflection or suggestion, but as truth. She had wanted to ease the ache she felt echoing in him. She had not moved. That choice had shaped everything that followed.
Now, standing in the same place, the fox felt neither regret nor relief, only understanding. Some moments exist precisely because they remain unfinished. Their power lies not in resolution, but in restraint.
The valley accepted her presence without reaction.
Snow continued to fall. Wind brushed past her fur, indifferent yet intimate.
The fox lowered herself beside the stone, curling her tails inward, allowing a memory to settle fully before releasing it. She did not need to hold it anymore.
The human had lived his life. He had painted, written, loved in ways shaped subtly by something he never named.
He had grown old, perhaps, or passed quietly, leaving behind works that others admired without knowing why they felt familiar. The fox had remained. And yet, in that remaining, she had changed.
She rose slowly, her form growing lighter, less defined. Spirits evolve not by accumulation, but by shedding. The fox felt herself loosening from places that once anchored her, the grove, the shrine, the river's edge.
She was not leaving the world. She was widening her path through it.
As she stepped away from the stone, the valley exhaled. Snow shifted gently, smoothing away impressions that had never fully formed. The marker remained, quiet and unremarkable, its purpose complete. The fox moved onward, toward higher ground where dawn would soon touch the horizon. Behind her, nothing marked her passing. And yet, the air felt subtly altered, as if something long held had finally been released. In time, the shrine would gather new moss. The grove would hear other footsteps. Lanterns would flicker along different paths. Names would be spoken and forgotten. But somewhere, between memory and mist, a fox spirit carried a human ache that no longer weighed her down. It had become part of her. And so she walked on, not toward solitude, nor toward attachment, but into a quieter understanding where love did not demand presence, and remembrance did not require return.
The night thinned.
Snow softened, and the valley, having borne witness, slept gently back into sleep. Years do not pass for spirits as they do for humans.
They drift, overlap, dissolve into one another like snowfall melting into a river.
Yet even within that endlessness, there are moments that mark change, not loudly, but with a subtle shift in weight, like the settling of ash after a long burning fire. For the fox spirit, those years unfolded quietly. She moved beyond the golden grove, beyond the familiar cadence of shrine bells and lantern light.
Her path took her through higher forests where snow lingered even in spring, and across ridges where wind carved patterns into ice that vanished by morning.
She no longer lingered near villages, nor watched human lives unfold from a distance.
Instead, she listened.
She learned the language of mountains, the deep patience of stone, the slow breath of glaciers hidden beneath soil and root. She learned the way storms speak to one another across valleys, and how dawn announces itself long before light arrives. These lessons required no longing, no attachment. They existed simply to be absorbed. Yet memory did not vanish. It surfaced in small, unexpected ways. When she passed a frozen stream and saw moonlight fractured across its surface, she remembered parchment softened by damp air. When wind carried the faint scent of ink and smoke from distant settlements, she recalled a human presence that once shaped her awareness of time. But these memories no longer pulled at her.
They rested within her like smooth stones, warmed by use, worn by acceptance.
At times, she sensed other spirits watching her as she crossed their territories. Winter beings of mist and frost, mountain watchers older than names, echoes of creatures born before humans shaped the land with words. They observed her quietly, recognizing the subtle shift in her essence. She carried something different now. Not loss, not sorrow.
Understanding.
One night, beneath a sky veiled with thin clouds, the fox paused atop a ridge overlooking a wide plain of snow. Below, the land stretched unbroken and untouched, reflecting starlight with quiet resolve. No path crossed it. No sound disturbed it. She sat and watched the hours pass.
In that stillness, she felt time move through her rather than around her.
The years she had crossed were not behind her, nor ahead. They were layered within her form, shaping how she perceived the world. She realized then that her love had not tethered her to the past.
It had taught her how to let go without forgetting.
The fox rose and continued onward, her steps light, her presence thinning with each passing season.
She no longer sought places of meaning. Meaning followed her naturally, emerging wherever she paused long enough to listen.
In distant villages, children would sometimes speak of a warmth that passed through snowfields without melting them. Travelers would dream of golden forests they had never seen. Artists would paint moonlight with an ache they could not explain. The fox did not witness these things.
She did not need to. Her journey now was quieter than memory, softer than longing.
She crossed years as one crosses shallow water, aware of its presence, but never burdened by its weight. And somewhere beneath the turning of seasons, the world continued to breathe, shaped in small, invisible ways by a spirit who had learned how to love without holding. As she moved through those high places, the fox spirit became aware of something subtle changing within her perception. The world no longer appeared divided between spirit and mortal, between past and present. Instead, everything seemed to exist in layers like snowfall settling upon older snow, indistinguishable yet deeply connected. She began to notice how silence itself carried weight. In the forests where the snow lay thickest, there were moments when even the wind held its breath.
The branches did not creak. The ice did not crack.
In those rare intervals, the fox felt as though the world itself was listening, not for sound, but for understanding. She would pause then, standing perfectly still, her breath dissolving into the air. In that stillness, memories surfaced gently, no longer sharp enough to wound. She remembered the way the human's presence once altered the forest, not by sound, but by attention.
How the river seemed to slow when he knelt beside it.
How the leaves had fallen differently when he passed, as though aware of being seen. These recollections no longer stirred longing. They had softened into something else, a quiet gratitude shaped by time. The fox realized that love, when left untouched by possession, does not fade.
It transforms.
It becomes part of the landscape of the spirit, shaping how one moves through the world long after the source has vanished. As seasons passed, she witnessed the subtle migrations of other spirits. Snow maidens dissolving into spring mist. Wind guardians retreating into mountain hollows. Old shrine watchers fading as their stones cracked and sank back into earth. Nothing resisted its ending. And yet, nothing was truly lost. She understood now that the human world and the spirit world did not exist apart from one another. They were reflections, each shaping the other through attention and memory. A human gaze could awaken a spirit. A spirit's passage could leave echoes in human dreams.
This knowledge did not burden her.
It freed her. On one winter night, as frost crept across the plains like a slow tide, the fox sensed a familiar rhythm in the air, faint, distant, and fleeting. Not a presence, but a resonance. A pattern she recognized not with thought, but with instinct. Somewhere far away, a human hand moved across paper.
She did not turn toward it.
She simply acknowledged it, the way one acknowledges a passing star. The fox continued onward, her form becoming lighter with each year, her essence woven more deeply into the land itself. She no longer left tracks in snow, nor stirred mist as she passed. She had become a quiet influence rather than a visible being.
In places where winters grew harsher, people spoke of snow that felt gentler upon the skin.
In valleys where storms once lingered, they found themselves passing more quickly, leaving behind a strange calm. No one attributed these changes to a fox spirit. They did not need to. The fox had learned that the most enduring presence is the one that asks for nothing in return. As she crossed yet another ridge beneath a pale, unmoving moon, she paused for the final time that season. Below her, the land unfolded in endless white, untouched, unmarked, peaceful.
She did not belong to it.
Nor was she separate from it.
She closed her eyes, letting the cold pass through her without resistance, and continued her journey, not away from the past, but alongside it, carrying its quiet warmth into an ever-unfolding present.
Winter returned not as a season, but as a state of being. The fox spirit no longer marked time by snowfall or thaw. Instead, she sensed the slow turning of years through subtler signs, the way mountains settled deeper into themselves, the way forests learned new silences, the way old paths softened until even memory struggled to trace them. She had become something quieter than she once was. Where her presence had once shimmered like foxfire at the edge of sight, now it moved more like breath, unseen yet unmistakably there.
She passed through valleys without disturbing frost.
She crossed rivers without rippling their skin.
The world accepted her as it accepts moonlight without question.
And still, within her, the echo of a human life remained. Not the image of his face, nor the sound of his steps, but the feeling of being witnessed, of existing, if only briefly, within another's fragile attention. That memory did not ache any more. It rested inside her like an ember buried deep beneath snow, warm without burning. At times, she wandered near villages she had never known before. She watched lanterns sway beneath eaves, listened to doors slide shut against the cold, felt the warmth of human lives gathered quietly behind paper walls.
These moments did not call her forward.
They simply reminded her of the gentle rhythm that bound all fleeting things together. In one such village, perched along a narrow mountain road, she paused beside an abandoned shrine.
Its stone fox guardians had eroded into soft shapes, their features smoothed by centuries of weather.
Snow gathered in their hollow eyes. The fox spirit stood before them and felt no obligation.
She did not bow. She did not linger.
She understood now that devotion does not require permanence, and guardianship does not demand presence. The shrine, like all things, would dissolve when its time came, and that, too, was natural. As she turned away, a breeze stirred the prayer ribbons tied long ago to the shrine's branches. They whispered faintly, not with words, but with memory, fragments of hope, gratitude, longing, all released into the air. The fox listened, then continued on. High above, the moon watched without judgment. It had watched empires rise and vanish, forests grow and burn, spirits awaken and fade. It watched her now with the same quiet impartiality. She felt no need to be seen.
The crossing she was making was not one of distance, but of state. She was moving beyond the shape she had once held, into something broader and less defined.
A presence carried not by form, but by influence. In places where snow fell gently instead of harshly, she had passed.
In moments when dreams lingered longer than they should, she had brushed close.
In the hush that followed grief, the space where sorrow softened into remembrance, she remained. The fox spirit understood at last that love does not always end in union or loss. Sometimes it ends in transformation. Sometimes it becomes the quiet force that allows other lives to unfold without interference.
As the night deepened and the mountains darkened into silhouette, she paused upon a ridge where the wind moved slowly, respectfully.
Below her stretched a land asleep beneath winter's careful hand.
She did not look back. She did not look forward.
She simply existed fully, gently, without resistance. And as she stepped beyond the ridge and vanished into the long breath of winter, the world did not feel her absence. It felt, instead, a deeper calm. Winter returned not as a season, but as a state of being. The fox spirit no longer marked time by snowfall or thaw. Instead, she sensed the slow turning of years through subtler signs, the way mountains settled deeper into themselves, the way forests learned new silences, the way old paths softened until even memory struggled to trace them. She had become something quieter than she once was. Where her presence had once shimmered like foxfire at the edge of sight, now it moved more like breath, unseen yet unmistakably there.
She passed through valleys without disturbing frost.
She crossed rivers without rippling their skin.
The world accepted her as it accepts moonlight without question.
And still, within her, the echo of a human life remained. Not the image of his face, nor the sound of his steps, but the feeling of being witnessed, of existing, if only briefly, within another's fragile attention. That memory did not ache any more. It rested inside her like an ember buried deep beneath snow, warm without burning. At times, she wandered near villages she had never known before. She watched lanterns sway beneath eaves, listened to doors slide shut against the cold, felt the warmth of human lives gathered quietly behind paper walls.
These moments did not call her forward.
They simply reminded her of the gentle rhythm that bound all fleeting things together. In one such village, perched along a narrow mountain road, she paused beside an abandoned shrine.
Its stone fox guardians had eroded into soft shapes, their features smoothed by centuries of weather.
Snow gathered in their hollow eyes. The fox spirit stood before them and felt no obligation.
She did not bow. She did not linger.
She understood now that devotion does not require permanence, and guardianship does not demand presence. The shrine, like all things, would dissolve when its time came, and that, too, was natural. As she turned away, a breeze stirred the prayer ribbons tied long ago to the shrine's branches. They whispered faintly, not with words, but with memory, fragments of hope, gratitude, longing, all released into the air. The fox listened, then continued on. High above, the moon watched without judgment. It had watched empires rise and vanish, forests grow and burn, spirits awaken and fade. It watched her now with the same quiet impartiality. She felt no need to be seen.
The crossing she was making was not one of distance, but of state. She was moving beyond the shape she had once held, into something broader and less defined.
A presence carried not by form, but by influence. In places where snow fell gently instead of harshly, she had passed. In moments when dreams lingered longer than they should, she had brushed close. In the hush that followed grief, the space where sorrow softened into remembrance, she remained. The fox spirit understood at last that love does not always end in union or loss. Sometimes it ends in transformation. Sometimes it becomes the quiet force that allows other lives to unfold without interference.
As the night deepened and the mountains darkened into silhouette, she paused upon a ridge where the wind moved slowly, respectfully.
Below her stretched land asleep beneath winter's careful hand.
She did not look back. She did not look forward.
She simply existed fully, gently, without resistance. And as she stepped beyond the ridge and vanished into the long breath of winter, the world did not feel her absence. It felt, instead, a deeper calm.
The snow did not remember her as a shape. It remembered her as a feeling. When night settled over the mountain and the moon thinned behind drifting cloud, the forest no longer searched for the fox spirit's white form among the trees.
Instead, it listened for the way the silence deepened. The wake-hold softened into something almost kind.
In that gentling, she still existed. She moved now without intention.
Not wandering, not watching. Simply being. Where the wind slowed between the trunks of cedar and pine, she was there. Where frost traced pale patterns along the edges of stone, she lingered. Where snow settled into hollows and did not stir even when branches shifted above, her presence rested like a held breath finally released.
The world no longer asked her to choose.
There had once been a tension within her, a quiet pulling between what she was and what she had come to feel. Spirit and season. Memory and longing. Watcher and participant. That tension dissolved without ceremony, as naturally as ice loosens its hold on river water beneath the surface. She did not lose herself.
She widened.
In the village below, years passed. Lanterns were replaced. Roofs were repaired. Children grew and left, and new voices filled old spaces. The scholar's name faded from conversation, yet his paintings remained, passed gently from hand to hand. People spoke of them in low tones, saying they felt like winter without cold, like solitude without loneliness. No one connected the feeling to the mountain. No one needed to. On certain nights, when snow fell in long, unbroken curtains and sound vanished from the world, people slept more deeply than usual. Dreams softened. Waking felt gentler.
Grief loosened its grip without explanation. These nights were rare, but they returned.
High above, the mountain breathed. The fox spirit was no longer something the mountain held apart from itself. She had become a quiet alignment, the moment when snow touched earth without sound, the space between two heartbeats where nothing ached. She existed not as memory alone, nor as presence alone, but as continuity. There were moments, faint, almost imperceptible, when something like remembrance stirred. A flicker of ink on parchment, the curve of a human hand lifting toward moonlight, the echo of rain threading through leaves. These did not pull at her. They passed through her like clouds across the moon, altering the light without obscuring it. Love, she understood now, did not always demand closeness. Sometimes it simply changed the shape of what followed.
Winter continued. Spring came quietly.
Snow melted without drama, seeping into the soil that fed the forest. Streams swelled, then calmed. Petals fell where snow once lay pale against dark earth. Even then, something of the fox spirit remained, not visible but unmistakable. Those who walked the forest paths in early dawn sometimes felt a sudden calm, a sensation of having arrived somewhere important without knowing why. Birds perched longer. Wind passed more slowly.
The world seemed to pause, just long enough to allow rest.
And in that pause, the fox spirit slept, not as mortals sleep, but as mountains do, as seasons do, as stories do when they are no longer being told, yet are not forgotten.
She did not vanish into silence. She became it.
And the mountain, the forest, the drifting snow all carried her forward, not as a tale to be repeated, but as a quiet truth that needed no voice. There is a moment before sleep when the world loosens its hold. Thoughts slow. The edges of memory soften. Even time seems unsure of its own passing. It is in this quiet space, neither waking nor dream, that winter settles most gently. The mountain rests now. Snow lies unbroken across its slopes, smooth as untouched parchment.
No footsteps disturb it.
No wind insists upon movement. The forest breathes in long, patient rhythms, each exhale carrying the faint scent of cedar and cold stone. Nothing is waiting. Nothing needs to happen.
The story has already folded itself back into the land.
Somewhere beyond sight, streams continue their slow work beneath ice.
Roots drink quietly from the dark.
Stars shift almost imperceptibly above the clouds. All of it moves, yet nothing rushes. If there was once a fox spirit here, she is no longer separate from the night. If there was once a human heart listening to the hush of falling snow, its echo has settled into the earth like warmth held long after a fire fades. What remains is peace, not the absence of feeling, but the absence of strain. Winter does not ask to be remembered. It simply stays. Snow continues to fall, light and endless, each flake finding its place without effort. The mountain accepts it all, layer by layer, without judgment or desire. And as the night deepens, the silence grows softer still, wide enough to hold rest, wide enough to hold dreams. There is nowhere else to go, nothing left to follow. Only this quiet breath of winter stretching on and on and on until even the snow itself forgets to fall, and sleep comes, as gently as it always does,